The war was finally over. The mighty Zerinth Empire, once feared across the stars, had fallen to the unstoppable force of humanity. Their capital city, Velsura, lay in ruins, smoke rising from the once golden towers. Human soldiers patrolled the streets, ensuring no resistance remained. Commander Daniel Cross walked through the grand palace gates, his expression unreadable. He was the hero of this war, the soldier who had led humanity to victory. Now he was here to secure the surrender of the Zerinth royals. Inside the palace, Princess Soraya Zerinth sat on an ornate chair, her hands bound in energy cuffs. Despite being a prisoner, she held her head high, her silver eyes cold and distant. The last heir of the empire refused to show weakness. When Daniel entered, the guards saluted him. Stepping aside, he observed the alien princess before him. Her long silver hair, her regal presence, her defiant gaze. Something about her felt oddly familiar. Soraya's heart pounded as she looked at the human standing before her. That face, those eyes. A long-buried memory tugged at the edges of her mind, but she quickly suppressed it. No, it couldn't be. He was just another enemy soldier. Daniel took a step forward. Princess Soraya, by order of the Human Federation, you are now a prisoner of war. Cooperate, and this will go smoothly. His voice was firm, but not cruel. Soraya smirked. So this is the great human warrior who conquered my people. You don't look so terrifying. Daniel ignored the provocation. He had fought many battles, but something about this moment unsettled him. The princess's voice. It stirred something in his mind, something long forgotten. One of his officers handed him a datapad. Sir, orders from command. The princess is to be placed under house arrest in the palace while negotiations proceed. Daniel nodded. Understood. He turned to Soraya. Looks like you're staying here. Don't try anything foolish. Soraya said nothing, but as Daniel turned to leave, she whispered just loud enough for him to hear. Erin. Daniel froze. It was a name he hadn't heard in years, a name he didn't even remember belonging to him. He turned sharply, his eyes locking onto Soraya's. For the first time since the war ended, doubt flickered in his mind. What did you just say? But Soraya had already turned away, hiding the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Daniel clenched his fists. Why did that name make his chest feel so tight? Outside, the human flag waved over the palace, marking humanity's victory. But deep inside, an old truth was waiting to be uncovered. Daniel Cross couldn't sleep. He sat in his quarters inside the captured Zerinth palace, staring at the ceiling. The princess's voice still echoed in his mind. Erin. That name. Why did it sound so familiar? Why did it make his heart race? Daniel shook his head. He had no time for distractions. He was a soldier, a war hero. His duty was to secure the surrender of the Zerinth Empire, not get lost in old memories that shouldn't even exist. But sleep never came. The next morning, Daniel walked through the palace halls, inspecting the situation. Human soldiers stood guard, watching the remaining Zerinth nobles. Some glared with hatred, others with fear. As Daniel entered the royal garden, he saw Princess Soraya standing near a fountain, staring into the water. She turned when she heard his footsteps. For the first time, she looked uncertain. You don't remember me, do you? She asked softly. Daniel frowned. I don't know what game you're playing, princess, but I don't have time for it. Soraya sighed. She walked toward him, her silver eyes searching his face. You were not always Daniel Cross, she said. Once, long ago, you were Erin, my friend. Daniel's chest tightened. He almost wanted to believe her, but how could that be true? I don't remember anything like that, he said firmly. Soraya let out a bitter laugh. Of course you don't. Humans took you from us. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. That's a lie. Soraya stepped closer, her voice now filled with emotion. Think, Daniel. Do you remember your childhood? Do you remember where you came from before you became a soldier? Daniel opened his mouth. But no words came out, because he didn't remember. He knew he had been an orphan, raised in a human colony. But before that, his memories were blurry, as if something had erased them. Soraya saw the hesitation in his eyes. "You were born here, in the Zerinth Empire," she said. "You and I played together in these very gardens. We were best friends. And then, one day, you disappeared." Daniel shook his head. "That's impossible." Soraya looked at him with sadness. "If I'm wrong, then tell me, where were you before the human military found you?" Daniel's breath caught. His mind was blank. He had never thought about it before. Soraya stepped back. "You don't have to believe me," she said, "but deep down, you already know the truth." She turned and walked away, leaving Daniel standing alone, his heart pounding. For the first time in years, Daniel Cross began to doubt everything he thought he knew. Daniel Cross paced inside his quarters, his mind restless. Soraya's words wouldn't leave him. "You were not always Daniel Cross. Once, long ago, you were Erin, my friend." It was a lie. It had to be. He was a human soldier, a war hero. He had trained in the military for years. He had no connection to the Zerinth. So why couldn't he remember his early life? Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his temples. The more he tried to recall his childhood, the more his head ached. Glimpses of something old and buried. Flashes of light, a voice, soft and familiar. A little girl with silver hair, laughing, running through green fields under an alien sky. Daniel gasped and snapped back to reality. What was that? His breathing was unsteady. Was it just his imagination? Or were those real memories? Meanwhile, in her chambers, Soraya couldn't stop thinking about him. She had spent years believing Erin was dead. When she was younger, she had cried for him. She had searched, but no one knew where he had gone. And now, the war hero standing before her was him. But he didn't remember her. They had erased him. Soraya clenched her fists. Humans had taken him, changed him, made him their weapon. But she saw it in his eyes. The uncertainty, the doubt. Deep down, he knew something wasn't right. She had to make him remember. That night, Daniel couldn't take it anymore. He had to know the truth. He accessed his military records, searching for information about his past. But what he found made his blood run cold. His official records only started at the age of 10. Before that, there was nothing. A complete blank. This was impossible. Everyone had a past. Everyone had a childhood. So why didn't he? He dug deeper, hacking into classified files. His hands trembled as he found an old document. Subject: Erin Zerinth. Species: human. Possible Zerinth association. Status: retrieved during conflict. Reassigned. Memory alteration complete. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It was him. His name, before he became Daniel Cross. And then, as if a dam had broken, his mind unlocked. Flashes of memory came crashing back. Soraya, laughing as she pulled him through the palace halls. Nights spent watching the stars, whispering dreams of adventure. A promise. "I'll always be your friend, no matter what happens." Daniel staggered back, gripping the desk for support. It was true. He had been taken. His past had been stolen. And now he didn't know who he was anymore. Daniel Cross stood frozen, staring at the classified file on his screen. His real name, Erin Zerinth, stared back at him like a ghost from a forgotten past. He had spent years believing he was just a soldier, a war hero who fought for humanity. But the truth was far more terrifying. He was never meant to be a soldier. He had been stolen. His past had been erased, his memories altered. He wasn't just a war hero. He was a stolen child of the very empire he helped to destroy. His hands clenched into fists. Why? Why had the human military done this to him? The answer was clear. He had been a weapon from the start, a human child, raised to fight against the people who once called him family. His stomach twisted. Soraya was telling the truth. The next morning, Daniel stormed into the royal chambers where Soraya was kept. She stood by the window, gazing at the ruined city outside. When she turned to face him, she saw the storm in his eyes. "You remember, don't you?" she asked softly. Daniel glared at her. "What else do you know?" Soraya sighed. "I know they took you when you were just a boy. The humans must have seen something special in you. So they erased your past and made you their perfect soldier." Daniel's jaw tightened. He hated that she was right. "I don't understand," he muttered. "Why me?" Soraya stepped closer, studying his face. "Because you were the best of us," she said. "Even as a child, you were strong, determined, and brave. You weren't just my friend, Erin. You were the future of our people." Daniel turned away, his mind spinning. He had spent years fighting the people he was meant to protect. Soraya's voice softened. "You were never our enemy, Erin. You were stolen, used." Daniel clenched his fists. "Stop calling me that," he snapped. "I don't know who I am anymore." Soraya's gaze didn't waver. "Then let me help you remember." He looked at her, searching for deception in her silver eyes. But all he saw was pain and hope. For the first time, Daniel wasn't sure if he was fighting for the right side. Daniel stood in the royal chamber, his mind a battlefield of memories. His whole life, his training, his victories, his identity, was a lie. Soraya watched him carefully. She knew he was struggling. She had waited years for this moment, but now that it was here, she could see the pain in his eyes. "You're not my enemy, Erin," she said gently. Daniel flinched at the name, but he didn't correct her this time. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "If I was really one of you, why didn't anyone come for me?" Soraya sighed. "We tried. My father sent search teams, but the humans covered their tracks too well. By the time we got close, you were already one of them." Daniel swallowed hard. It made sense. If the human military had truly taken him for a purpose, they wouldn't have left any trace behind. He clenched his fists. "They turned me into their weapon." Soraya stepped closer, her voice filled with sorrow. "And they made you forget us." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Daniel exhaled, his voice bitter. "It doesn't matter now. The war is over. I fought against your people. I led the army that conquered your world." Soraya didn't look away. "And yet you saved my life." Daniel frowned. "What?" Soraya smiled slightly. "You could have let them kill me. You could have sent me away to be executed. But you didn't." Daniel's heart pounded. She was right. He had followed orders all his life, but when it came to her, something had stopped him. He hadn't understood it then. But now, Soraya took another step closer. "Somewhere inside you, Erin, the boy I knew is still there." Daniel shook his head. "I don't know who I am anymore." Soraya's expression softened. "Then let me help you remember." Daniel looked at her, searching for deception, but all he saw was hope. For the first time since the war ended, he wasn't sure where he truly belonged. The days after their conversation were filled with confusion and silence. Daniel spent more time in the royal palace, trying to piece together the fragments of his past, but every answer only seemed to lead to more questions. It was strange to feel so lost. For years, he had been certain of who he was. A soldier, a hero, a man fighting for the survival of humanity. Now those walls of certainty were crumbling, and the truth was so much more complicated. One evening, as the sun set over the ruins of the Zerinth capital, Daniel found himself on a balcony, staring at the smoke rising from the city. The wind was soft, and he could almost hear the faint whispers of his childhood. Laughter, voices, promises made long ago. He clenched his jaw and shook his head. "It's over," he muttered to himself. The war was over. He had won. The Zerinth had lost. But what did that really mean now? Soraya found him there, standing silently, his eyes distant. She had been watching him from the shadows for some time, noticing the way his shoulders were tense, as if he was carrying the weight of a world that wasn't his to bear. "Still thinking about it?" she asked, her voice soft. Daniel didn't turn to face her. "I'm trying to understand," he said. "All this time, I fought. I've won. But for what? To destroy what was once mine." Soraya approached slowly, her silver eyes fixed on him. "I told you before, you were never our enemy." Daniel finally turned to her, his expression hard. "I don't know who I am, Soraya. How can I believe you when everything I've known tells me otherwise?" She didn't flinch. "Because I know the truth, and I know you know it too." Daniel was silent for a long moment. The words were burning inside him, but he couldn't speak them aloud. He had fought for peace, for unity among the human race. He had trusted that his cause was just. But now, faced with the truth of his past, he didn't know what was right anymore. Soraya took a step closer. "I won't lie to you. I can't change the past. But the future, that's ours to decide." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "Your people came here to conquer, yes. But I know you don't want to keep fighting. You didn't choose this war. You were made to fight it." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "And you don't have to keep fighting now. Not for them. Not for a cause you didn't choose." Daniel looked out at the city once more. Peace. The word seemed so foreign, yet so needed. Could it be possible? Could he truly stop this cycle of hatred and destruction? "Maybe it's time to stop," he whispered. Soraya smiled softly, relief washing over her. "Then we will stop it, together." For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt something he hadn't known he was missing. Hope. The days grew tense as the peace talks between humanity and the Zerinth Empire were set to begin. The palace was filled with diplomats and military officers, all eager to discuss the terms of surrender. Yet beneath the calm exterior of negotiations, a quiet storm was brewing. Daniel Cross couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had walked into the Zerinth Palace as a conqueror, but now, as he stood in the heart of the empire, he wasn't so sure what he was fighting for anymore. The truth about his past haunted him, and Soraya's words echoed in his mind. The future was theirs to decide, but not everyone in the Zerinth Empire was ready to let go of the war. In the shadows of the palace, a small but powerful faction of Zerinth soldiers, loyal to the old regime, had begun to stir. They didn't trust Soraya's sudden change of heart, nor did they trust Daniel Cross, the human who had once been their own. They were determined to continue the fight, even if it meant betraying the peace. One evening, as Daniel met with Soraya to discuss the progress of the talks, a loud explosion shattered the quiet of the night. The palace trembled, and the distant sound of gunfire echoed through the halls. Soraya's eyes widened in alarm. "They've started the resistance," she said, her voice urgent. Daniel didn't need any further explanation. He grabbed his weapon, turning toward the door. "I'll go with you. We'll stop them before they get out of hand." But Soraya shook her head. "No, Daniel. The resistance doesn't just want to destroy the peace talks. They want to destroy you." Daniel's chest tightened. "What?" "Some of them know who you really are," Soraya explained. "They see you as a traitor, one of their own who sided with the enemy. They want to make an example of you." Daniel's hand trembled as he tightened his grip on his weapon. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't an enemy. But to them, he would always be the man who betrayed his people. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor, and Daniel whirled around to face a group of Zerinth soldiers. They were not part of the official peace talks. They wore black armor, their faces hidden behind masks. Daniel's heart sank. These weren't just rebels. They were a hidden faction, prepared to fight to the death. "Soraya," Daniel said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Get to the safe room. Now." She hesitated, but the urgency in his tone left no room for argument. "Be careful. With one last glance, she ran down the corridor, leaving Daniel to face the soldiers alone. The soldiers advanced, their weapons raised. "Human traitor," one of them spat. "You will pay for your betrayal." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. He had fought battles before, but this one was different. The resistance had no idea what they had just started. The air in the Zerinth Palace was thick with tension. The sound of explosions and gunfire echoed from the distant courtyards. Daniel's mind raced as he faced down the group of rebels who had come to silence him. They were masked, their eyes filled with hatred, and their weapons gleamed in the dim light of the corridor. They had no idea what they were up against. Daniel's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. These weren't just ordinary soldiers. They had come for him, and he wasn't going down without a fight. "Step aside, human," one of the rebels growled, his weapon aimed directly at Daniel's chest. "You have no place here." Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. "I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice steady, but his eyes cold. "But if you want to make me one, we can do this the hard way." The rebels didn't hesitate. They raised their weapons, ready to strike. But before they could fire, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. It was Soraya. She appeared at the end of the hallway, breathless but determined, her eyes locked on Daniel. "Stop," she commanded, her voice carrying authority. The rebels paused, momentarily confused. "Soraya, what are you doing here?" Daniel asked, surprised to see her. "They won't listen to reason," Soraya said, her gaze shifting to the rebels. "They've been blinded by their hatred. But you," her eyes met Daniel's. "You can stop this." The rebels growled in frustration. "Traitor," one spat. "You're siding with the enemy." Soraya stepped forward, her voice steady but full of conviction. "I am the rightful heir of the Zerinth Empire, and I declare this war over." The rebels exchanged uncertain glances, but they didn't lower their weapons. Daniel stepped forward, moving between Soraya and the rebels. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and firm. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the future. If you keep fighting, you'll destroy everything we've worked for." The leader of the rebels snarled, taking a step forward. "You've already destroyed our future, human." Just as the tension seemed ready to snap, a loud voice boomed from the far end of the hall. "Enough." It was one of the high-ranking Zerinth officials who had been loyal to Soraya's father. His arrival shifted the balance of power. "These rebels do not represent the people of Zerinth," he declared. "They have lost their way." The rebels hesitated, looking between their leader and the approaching official. For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a growl of frustration, the rebel leader lowered his weapon. "You may have won this time, human, but don't think it's over." The rebels turned and retreated, disappearing into the shadows of the palace. Soraya sighed in relief, looking at Daniel. "You did it," she said softly. Daniel exhaled, his body still tense. "We did it." Soraya stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "I told you, we could stop this together." Daniel nodded, but a part of him remained uneasy. The war wasn't truly over, not yet, but for the first time since he had arrived on this planet, he could see a way forward, a way to build a future, together. The palace was silent now, the air thick with the promise of change. Daniel knew the hardest part was yet to come. But as he looked at Soraya, he realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. The war had ended, but the battle for peace was far from over. The palace was quieter now, but the air was still charged with tension. The Zerinth Empire, broken and bruised, was at a crossroads, and so were Daniel and Soraya. As the night settled over the city, Daniel sat by a window, gazing out at the ruins. The city had once been a thriving hub of culture and power. Now it was a shell of its former self. But amidst the destruction, there was a flicker of hope, a chance to rebuild. Soraya approached, her footsteps soft on the stone floor. She looked at him, Her silver eyes filled with quiet understanding. "You're thinking about the future," she said, her voice gentle. Daniel nodded. "It's hard to know what that future looks like. I've spent my whole life fighting, thinking I was doing the right thing. Now I'm not so sure." Soraya sat down beside him. "I know it's hard," she said, "but this is our chance to choose a different path, a path where we don't fight anymore." Daniel looked at her, his brow furrowed. "But how do we convince everyone to stop? There are still people who want war, people who want revenge." "Not everyone," Soraya replied. "There are many who are tired of fighting, just like you. They want peace. They just need someone to show them the way." Daniel sighed. "And if we fail?" Soraya placed a hand on his. "We won't fail, Daniel. Not if we do this together." Daniel looked down at their hands, the weight of the decision pressing on him. He had always believed in the power of a fight. But now, the fight wasn't just about winning. It was about choosing. Choosing to let go of hatred, choosing to trust in something more than war. He turned to Soraya. "I don't know if I can do this, if I can be the leader they need." Soraya smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be the person I know you are. The person who believes in something better." Daniel felt his heart soften at her words. He had spent so much time hiding behind the mask of a soldier, trying to live up to the image of a hero. But now, for the first time, he realized that maybe being the hero didn't mean fighting. Maybe it meant leading with kindness, with trust, with hope. The door to the chamber opened, and a messenger stepped inside, holding a datapad. "Commander Cross, Princess Soraya," he said, bowing respectfully. "The final peace talks are about to begin. The leaders are waiting for you." Soraya stood up and glanced at Daniel. "Are you ready?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I'm ready." The peace talks were held in the heart of the palace, surrounded by the leaders of both the Human Federation and the remaining Zerinth nobles. There were still those who couldn't accept the idea of peace, who saw it as weakness. But as Soraya stood beside Daniel, they were both ready to face the challenge ahead. It was a long and difficult process, but with every word spoken, the path to peace grew clearer. And with every agreement signed, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The war was truly over. As the talks concluded, Daniel turned to Soraya, a quiet smile forming on his face. "We did it." Soraya nodded, her expression soft. Together. The future was theirs to shape. And for the first time, Daniel felt that it could be a future worth fighting for. The palace was quiet, the once oppressive tension finally lifting from the air. The peace talks had been long, difficult, and sometimes contentious. But in the end, the people of the Zerinth Empire and humanity had reached a fragile but powerful agreement. The war was officially over. The soldiers had put down their weapons, and the leaders had signed the treaties. Daniel stood outside the royal chambers, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sky was clear, the stars beginning to twinkle in the distance. He had never imagined this moment would come, the end of a war he had started, a war he had been part of, but now it was over. And with it, the weight of his past began to feel a little lighter. Soraya walked up beside him, her presence comforting. She had been at his side through everything, the enemy princess who had become his ally, his guide, his friend. The future was uncertain, but together they would face it. "Are you sure you're okay?" Soraya asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. Daniel turned to her, offering a small smile. "I'm okay. It's just a lot to take in." He paused, watching the stars. "I was a soldier for so long, Soraya. I don't know what to do now." Soraya looked at him with a mix of understanding and compassion. "You don't have to be a soldier anymore, Daniel. You can be who you want to be." Daniel's gaze softened, and he nodded slowly. For the first time, he felt the truth of her words settle in his chest. The weight of being the soldier, of always fighting, had defined him for so long. But now, the war was over, and he was free to choose something else, a life that wasn't bound by duty or revenge. "You've already done more than enough," Soraya added, her voice quiet. "You helped end the war, Daniel. You helped save us all." He glanced at her, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. We did it. Together. The words felt right. They had done it together. And now, they would build a future together. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. The next few days passed in a blur of celebration and relief. The Zerinth Empire began to rebuild, and the humans who had once occupied their cities helped them do it. The once divided worlds started to come together, slowly but surely. Daniel and Soraya worked side by side, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They were no longer enemies, no longer separated by a war that had almost destroyed them both. They were partners now. And as the final pieces of the peace treaty were put into place, Daniel stood on the balcony once again, this time with Soraya at his side. The stars above them sparkled, and below, the city that had once been torn apart now glowed with the light of a new beginning. For the first time, Daniel felt the weight of the past fall away, replaced with something lighter. The future, for once, seemed full of possibility. And as he looked at Soraya, he realized that the life he had always wanted, one of peace, of hope, of love, was now within his reach. "Thank you," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. "For everything." Soraya smiled softly, her hand reaching out to take his. "You don't have to thank me, Daniel. This is just the beginning." And together, they stepped into the future, ready to reclaim a life that was finally their own.